My wife always slags me off if there's anything in the background that is out of place.
Well, we are now live, so should be able to check. So, hello and welcome to the latest webinar on the Elemental Programme for 2023. Our topic for the hour today, maximising eco funding for energy efficiency, in our session sponsored by E.ON. The chair for the next 60 minutes, my name is Jim McClelland. I'm founder editor of Sust Meme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this morning are Chris Friedler, policy manager at the Association for Decentralised Energy, the ADE, Douglas McCabe, project manager North Lanarkshire Council, and Sofia Riaz, business development account manager at E.ON. It is all live with Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the appropriately named Ask a Question box you should find probably in the middle at the bottom of your screen. You pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. Quick bit about Elemental. This webinar forms part of a programme, panel debates hosted and produced by Elemental, elementaldigital.co.uk. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Please note, Elemental's CPD member. So the good news is that our webinars are CPD accredited, full diary of events on the website, range of upcoming sessions, including, I should mention, happening later today, coming up at 4 p.m, smart solutions for energy efficient buildings, one to catch there. Plus, you can also now view the back catalogue on a whole host of topics, available on demand, who's who great speakers, and everything is free to access. So just before we start, and usually today, we do have a quick 1-minute explainer video. So I'm hoping now one of my colleagues is going to press the button and we can roll the video, please.
At E.ON, our aim is to support councils and social housing providers to deliver the ECO4 obligation across UK communities, deploying around 20% of the available funding. We provide a turnkey retrofit solution focused on supporting those most in need. We do this by identifying areas where bid-free funding that we control could be targeted, by providing a fully costed and ring-fenced funding proposal with a delivery plan, and by working with an established supply chain to install energy efficiency measures in homes. We have a proud track record of delivery. During the previous ECO3 obligation, we helped 151,000 customers live healthier lives in cosier homes. And we installed 230,000 energy efficiency measures across the UK, saving residents over £1.9 billion in lifetime bill savings.
There we are. Thank you very much. So, a quick explainer, brief intro from me then, maximising eco funding for energy efficiency. Our panel are going to discuss how housing associations, local authorities can make the most of the available eco funding, including Eco4, EcoFlex and the upcoming Eco Plus. Due to start this April, run for 3 years to March 2026, the Eco Plus scheme aims to bring down people's energy bills, helping them insulate their homes, achieve better standards of energy efficiency. The intention is for Eco Plus to assist those on the lowest incomes, but also those living in the least energy efficient homes in lower council tax bands. So that should mean the latest iteration of Eco will help a wider group of people. And there is some money in the pot. Eco Plus has £1 billion in funding. But to put that in perspective, E.ON themselves, I think, have already granted something like 775 million in eco funding since the introduction of the scheme back in 2013. In fact, responding to the government announcement of the Eco Plus package, the UK Green Building Council, for example, said outright, these measures alone are no silver bullet. 1 billion over 3 years won't be enough to reach all those in need. So all the more reason then to make the very most of what we've got, enabling eco funding go as far as possible, benefit the maximum number of people and property. So enough from me, let the debate begin. As we start to explore how housing providers and local authorities can get the most out of available eco funding, I'd like to begin asking our panel to introduce themselves, explain their perspective, share some opening insights. It's a bit of a sort of who are you, how do you fit into the puzzle, and what do you think is the current state of play with eco funding for energy efficiency improvements? So to kick us off, first, representing parties across industrial, commercial, public sectors, can you please place eco funding in context for us from a policy perspective? Chris.
Thanks very much. My name's Chris Friedler. I'm a policy manager at the Association for Decentralized Energy, which is a trade association where we specialize in 4 main areas, one of which is energy efficiency. And I lead up our industrial decarbonisation work, but more importantly to this call, I also lead up our energy efficiency work. So how did we get here, and where are we at, sort of in the wider context of decarbonising buildings and energy efficiency? Well, to start off with, the Conservative manifesto, general election manifesto in 2019 promised 9.2 billion of energy efficiency measures across 3 main schemes. And we also then had the Green Homes Grant sort of during the beginnings of the pandemic, which was worth 2.2 billion. So there's been some serious money being pledged and thrown around, but as you may know about the Green Homes Grant, a lot of that money was recalled. And then we have also seen that the 9.2 billion has been shrunk. So there's 2 main strategies that have set out a lot of energy efficiency policy going forward. For the UK, that was the heat and building strategy, not to be confused with Scotland's heat in building strategy that was published a year earlier. And Scotland does get bonus points for getting theirs out the gate significantly earlier than the UK. As part of that, and also the Treasury's spending review, there's actually going to be less contributed than the 9.2 billion through that figure. And then that's also not to include, however, the eco schemes themselves. So eco's usually funded by a levy on consumer bills. However, given the energy price guarantee and taking all of these levies that would have been on bills, that's now coming through public spending almost in a similar way to the other schemes. So we can expect to see 1 billion out of ECO4 across 4 years, so from 2022 to 2026. And as has been mentioned earlier, Eco Plus is going to be 1 billion split between 2023, 2024, and 2025. So lots going on in this space. There is also, it has to be said, a little bit of a gap between the funding schemes that currently exist and what's happening in the wider context of energy efficiency. We know from the Climate Change Committee reports that we need to address the owner-occupier and private rented sector where people are more able to pay. Eco Plus is quite encouraging because it's starting to do that, which is a bit unusual compared to some of the other schemes. But there is a big gap between schemes that currently exist and where we need to get to. In fact, the Climate Change Committee, in its central balance scenario, so not one of its sort of either more sort of less extreme scenarios, but in the central pathway, it says that we require 55 billion just for the energy efficiency upgrades alone to reach net zero. And that's not bringing into any context sort of other areas like heat decarbonisation, heat pumps, heat networks, etc. So we've got quite a way to go. I don't think most people are expecting that 55 billion to come entirely from an increased eco scheme or from public sector spending as a whole, for that matter. But there's definitely quite a bit of a gap, and Eco Plus is doing something to bridge that gap. But yes, significantly further to go just yet. So we'll be very keen to see how Eco Plus starts us off.
Excellent, thanks. Nice balanced perspective there to begin with. So decarbonisation and energy efficiency, not necessarily, of course, the same thing always. 9.2 billion promised originally, that's since shrunk. As you say, heat and building strategy, or heat in. Scotland getting credits there for being quicker off the mark. But soberingly, you point to the fact there are gaps in funding. Yes, Eco Plus might be helping, but we are a long way short of anything like 55 billion, which it's estimated we could be needing. So yes, plenty of issues there in play. So now coming to you then, Douglas, so looking at issues from a local authority viewpoint, obviously. So how can ECO help boost energy efficiency, but with affordability more critical than ever right now, Douglas?
Well, thank you, Jim, and good morning to everyone. I would say it was nice to see you all, but I can't see anybody, so it's nice. But I'm Douglas McCabe, and I'm from North Lanarkshire Council. Now, some of you in the call might not know where North Lanarkshire is, but it's just in between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And we've had some famous people from the area. We've had Sir Matt Busby, who some of you might know, Keir Hardy, David Livingston, Sheena Easton, for those of you of a certain vintage. And more recently, we've had David McMillan, who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. So that's us up in North Lanarkshire. Now, for myself, I work primarily in the capital programme and the energy efficiency within North Lanarkshire, and I've got the task of kind of helping to lead our housing stock through the varied energy standards that we have in Scotland and nationally as well. So that is your kind of energy efficiency standard for social housing. It's called ECO 2. I always find the sequels are never as good as the originals. And also net zero by 2045. Now, some of you might think, I thought that was 2050, and you'd be right, because England have got 2050 as their net zero target. But us in Scotland, we thought, you know what, why not just bring it forward 5 years for no reason? Then we have various interim targets that we like to have as well. And this is despite everything rising. You know, everything's rising, whether it's material costs, energy costs, and tragically, fuel poverty rates as well. So people are unable to turn their heating on. And again, this is mainly in the social sector that I'm working in, but we do engage with owners, because obviously many of you in the call will have your capital programs. So you'll have to engage with owners all the time to get things done. But also the Scottish Government has got their Energy Efficient Scotland area-based schemes, and that is funding made available to owners to reduce the cost of energy efficiency measures, things like external wall insulation, PV panels. And yes, we can go into mixed tenure areas, but we're going into fully owned areas as well to try and encourage owners to participate in these programs. Now, in the good old days with ECO 3, we used to be able to blend funding streams, but unfortunately in the dark days of ECO 4, we're not allowed to do that. So we have to keep them very, very separate. Now, just talking about ECO 4 and talking about affordability and things, I mean, it's great. You know, from my understanding, it's going to last from 2022 to 2026, and it's going to offer billions of pounds. But unfortunately, in my next wee bit, I think Chris has stolen my thunder, because I was going to say that the Glasgow City Council and the kind of local authorities around it, of which North Lanarkshire is one, they did a study, and they were saying it's going to cost £9 billion for Glasgow and the surrounding areas to meet net zero. So that's basically your £9.2 billion away. But obviously, Chris, you mentioned the £55 billion. And to be honest, any authority that does any work on net zero, they always come back with figures in the billions. It's not millions, hundreds of thousands, there's always billions. So don't get me wrong, the billion that we're going to get from ECO 4 is welcome and will help, because you know things are very expensive at the moment and are getting more expensive. So it will help, but unfortunately it's not going to solve any problems. And we have had teething problems with ECO 4. We have actually got a scheme up and running for EcoFlex, and we have encountered nothing but teething problems. But the team in charge of that have done a remarkable job and are overcoming the challenges in front of us to actually get works on the ground and actually start helping people. So despite its challenges, and I'm sure we'll discuss some of those this morning, ECO 4 will be of benefit to those that really need it the most. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Douglas. So good to hear. So Matt Busby, Sheena Easter, and now Douglas McCabe. Three famous names there from...
Hi, James. There's a list of names.
So, yeah, capital programme and energy efficiency. ECO 2, which unlike The Godfather may not be a better sequel. You mentioned on a serious note, fuel poverty, heat or eat. Some people are really in the teeth of that challenge right now, and that is very, very, very tough experience. You also mentioned some changes in terms of no longer able to pursue blended funding approach, and also some teething problems in terms of application. And as you suggest, $1 billion used to be a lot of money. In a way nowadays, it really isn't. You know, there's that term is thrown around, bandied around like, you know, the amount that will solve all the issues. But as you said, whether it's 9 billion for one area alone or 55 billion countrywide, 1 billion really is quite a small drop in the ocean. But we are here to make the most of it. So coming to you then, Sofia, with ECO literally being short for energy company obligation, I'm going to ask you, what's your take on both the opportunities for E.ON, but the responsibilities for E.ON as well?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sofia Riaz. I work as a business development manager in the eco obligation at E.ON. I'm pretty much the bank at E.ON, so I do manage a substantial amount of funding, you'll be pleased to hear. And as part of my role, there's a responsibility to deploy our funding into your area. So when we look at opportunities, what we're trying to do is maximize the number of properties that we're treating, the number of measures being installed per property, and the potential savings that we're making. As an energy supplier, we have huge responsibilities. I think we can all agree with the current energy market challenges, the rising cost of living, and the increasingly visible impacts of climate change. We really need to take a look at what we're doing and how we're helping the most vulnerable. When we look at E.ON's purpose, it does directly respond to that. So we really want to lead the UK energy transition with our solutions for homes, businesses, cities, and really, to help pave the way to net zero. Speaking of opportunities, we've seen that Eco3 had a budget of around £640 million. Eco4's increased to £1 billion per annum. E.ON have a 20% market share of this budget, so we do have over £200 million worth of eco funding per year to spend, which is just over 10 million notional annual bill savings per year, for those of you that are familiar with the new term. Previous obligations focused primarily on low-cost one-off, the low-cost one-off measures like cavity, loft, but it didn't really address the problem of the whole house retrofit. So when we look at Eco4, it does mark a move towards renewables. So you'll see that there's an introduction of air source heat pump and solar PV. We are moving away from gas, so there is a cap on heating replacement. So we're looking at 5,000 a year across all obligated parties. Eco4 is designed very much to upgrade the worst performing properties through a whole house retrofit approach. So we're looking at really maximising energy efficiency potential and reducing energy costs for tenants and residents. Most of you, I'm hoping, are aware that there is a minimum requirement of moving up to EPC SAT bands. So effectively all F and G homes must be improved to at least a band D, and all E and D homes must be improved to at least a band C. Solid wall is huge in Eco4. There's a minimum of 90,000 solid wall insulation installs across all obligated parties over the 4 years. So, the opportunities for solid wall are huge, and there is a big focus on solid wall for us. You saw the little clip earlier where we mentioned our E.ON-led community approach. We feel that's ideal for local authorities and housing associations. At E.ON, we've got years of experience in delivering these community-based projects, and we have an extensive team of around 185 people. So they vary from call centre staff to scheme and project managers, and hopefully that gives you confidence that your communities are in safe hands. As part of the approach, we provide a turnkey solution. We're looking at working with you guys in a real partnership approach to really design, develop, and deliver these area-based schemes. It's very specific targeting, and you guys know your areas better than us, so we're hoping we can work together in identifying them. We'll survey the properties, so you're looking at tech surveys, retrofit assessments, review the data, provide a funding proposal, and as part of the proposal that we give you, there's a delivery and a mobilization plan. We use an approved supply chain, so we do look at local labour where possible. That then also contributes towards local job creation as part of the offer. And we think reporting is really key. So we do include bespoke reporting to meet your requirements, so you can accurately declare, what your carbon emission reductions are for the year through us. We'll ensure that the funding is ring-fenced for your projects, and if you're in Scotland or Wales, then you have the rural uplift of 35%, so there's additional funding. There's a huge opportunity for local authorities to gain access to eco funding. It is completely voluntary in terms of up to 50% of the obligation can be delivered through local authority, the flex scheme. So there are 4 separate qualifying routes. I won't go through all of those. I think you're all familiar with the first route, which is effectively households living in a SAT band rated D, E, F, or G, with a combined household gross income for all sources under £31,000. There is an introduction of Route 3. So these are the NHS referrals. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but by helping people through this route, we can reduce pressure on the NHS. We can help reduce the number of people who visit the doctors due to health issues brought by cold or damp properties. And there is a recognition of doctors and GPs' time and effort. So to reduce that administrative burden, Ofgem have published a standard referral letter on their website, and there's quite a few templates that local authorities can utilize, to help support you in your delivery. And then finally, continuing with opportunities. We mentioned Eco Plus earlier. That will be in addition to the current Eco 4 scheme. So it's basically, it'll sit alongside Eco 4. It'll enable us to quickly deliver cavity wall, loft insulation, and heating controls to households that may not be eligible for Eco 4. We mentioned earlier that Eco 4 it's worth an additional 1 billion on top of the already 1 billion planned for Eco 4 investments. It'll run for 3 years, so spring this year to March 2026. The proposal is to allocate 130 million pounds of the scheme budget for the first year, and 435 million to each of the second and third years. And obviously E.ON will have a percentage of that. So what we're looking at is when we go into an area and we're looking at projects, we can look at using Eco 4 and Eco Plus as a coordinated approach to really aid delivery efficiencies, and I guess help, that in turn will help obligated suppliers like ourselves and the installer supply chain to plan ahead to maximise our efforts. And, I guess what we don't want to do is look back in months or years to come and think, oh, we missed a trip there, we should have really done a lot more. So in summary, I think using the much wider eligibility criteria, which includes LFLEX, NHS route, Eco Plus, and we've also got the E.ON's own supplier data, Supplier Flex, which is a new feature that allows us to look at our customer base and self-declare customers struggling with fuel poverty as being eligible. I think by looking at all these routes, we'll be able to identify far more residents and ensure that your community is at the heart of the project.
Excellent, thank you. Very good, comprehensive run through an awful lot of the options and packages and elements and issues there. Thanks, Sofia. So you're the bank at E.ON, and with 20% market share, effectively, you're responsible for about 1 in every £5 spent, maximising the number of properties and measures and the amount of money saved. Whole house retrofit, good to hear that mentioned, and supply chains and reporting, but also like the fact you made the linkage between health and housing, which we often fail to do. So we've got some of the issues out there, this middle section now, and it's good to see some questions coming in the bottom already. Pop them in there for the closing chapter of this debate. But now the middle section, I call it challenges and conflicts. I'm going to zoom in on specifics. I'd like to challenge our panel, what the barriers are to the take-up of funding for housing association local authorities, eligibility, application obstacles, the difficulties, the shortfalls. It's what's the problem? Is it policy or process, awareness, access? And how can we make the most of this money tree, such as it is, to fund energy savings? So coming to you first, Douglas. So let's start with the eligibility issue. To what degree does Eco4, EcoFlex funding target both the people and the properties most in need of assistance and improvement at present? What are the gaps? Who's missing out on access? What treatments are not covered? And how might things change going forward? So point to all the holes in the scheme as it stands, and how might things improve, Douglas?
Thanks, Jim. Asking somebody from a local authority for challenges and issues. Fantastic. Now, eligibility and bureaucracy. Now, if anybody fills in application forms for funding, you will know all about these issues. Now, when you're talking about eligibility, the first thing, there's a few. I've got 5 different points, so hopefully I'll run through them in record time. But basically, when you're looking at eligibility, we in our EcoFlex scheme, our contractors will go out and look at eligibility, and there is a bit of a barrier for just looking at if you're eligible for the scheme, because it's not Sophie was saying about your kind of different routes and proxies. It's not exactly sometimes easy to see if you actually are eligible for a scheme, and the contractor will have to bear that cost, especially if somebody isn't eligible when they've actually gone out and provided assistance, because a lot of the people we're going to be dealing with perhaps wouldn't apply to this by themselves. It would have to be somebody else that provides that assistance. So there is a concern amongst our contractors that they'll be doing a lot of work and yet maybe not get any funding or any work from it. So that is a concern to actually ask or ascertain if somebody's eligible. And then also there's a question of are we actually hitting the right people? Are we targeting the right people? Because when you look at the eco scheme, certainly from what I've looked at, the first eligibility criteria has nothing to do with people. It's got to do with the properties. Now, if you're a homeowner, it's D to G. If you're a renter, it's E to G. So then you kind of go from the actual property to look at the people inside it and to see if they are eligible in regards to the different proxies and the different routes that we're doing. So it's great. The funding is being used and is being prioritised, and it is being used to kind of see who's being eligible, and that's fine because obviously 25% of the UK greenhouse gases are from a built environment, and so we're focusing on the poorer houses and we're prioritising those with the people in it. Because obviously, if you've got a £500,000 sandstone villa, it probably will have an EPC of E to G, but we're not going to prioritise you over somebody who perhaps is earning less than £31,000 a year or has some sort of health issues. But like most things, it's the detail that's interesting. Now, this is when Sofia tells me I'm completely wrong and don't know what I'm talking about. Because from what I understand is that each banding has a monetary value, as a pot. So the money available for properties that are E, F or G is greater than properties that have an EPC band D. So when I was talking to some of the utility providers, they weren't actually going to be looking at properties that have an EPC banding of D. They'll be focusing on people who are E, F and G, especially at the first few years of the scheme, because the pot for Ds is so low. So really, when you're looking at a scheme, certainly from their point of view, they're looking at E, F and Gs. Now this is a bit of an issue for us, because when we're doing a scheme, we're going to be coming across properties that are gas. Now, if you've got a gas house, you're more likely to have an EPC of C or D. Any, or certainly most of the properties that I see that are E, F and Gs are electrical heated or have other forms of heating like LPG or whatever. So that is a bit of an issue for us when we are going into sites and we're seeing Ds. Now, occasionally we will see an E or probably an E. We won't go down as far as F or Gs, but that's a bit of an issue. So like, let's say we have our ESAB scheme, our area-based scheme, and we're hitting owners, and we're going to be providing owners with, say, external wall insulation. But then some of them might have ECO, might be qualified for ECO, which is great. But for ECO, you have to provide a few measures. You can't just provide like one. So you might get heating, you might get external wall insulation, you might get PVs, and you get that at no cost. Whereas the Scottish Government want us to have the owners make some sort of contribution. So even in the same street, you'll have different people getting different things with different costs. And sometimes neighbours aren't nice to each other. And that could be a bit of an issue for us as well. And don't get me wrong, I realise that you have to prioritise these things. But for people in gas houses that maybe have an EPC of a low C or a D, they may actually miss out. And sometimes when I think about these funding schemes, not just ECO, but you're talking about communities. So within a community, you may have an EF or G, but you'll have other ones that are Cs. And so you may have the same community, same house build, same age, that will get different measures or maybe no measures, because somebody may be working two jobs and don't go for the home kind of the how much money they get. But certainly you've got other people who've invested in their home, might have put some loft insulation in, might have put some triple glazing or double glazing in, and they won't qualify because their house isn't a low enough EPC, and yet people who haven't invested in their home will benefit from ECO4. So I feel that sometimes communities might be left behind, even though we're maybe prioritising it in the correct way. And the kind of third thing, from a local authority point of view, I feel that some people might miss out because of lack of information. And this isn't necessarily anyone's fault, but generally, us as a local authority, we don't have large-scale owner-occupier projects. We'll focus on the council properties and maybe surrounding owners. So we don't have that kind of large scale that we can just give to a utility provider and say, look, could you run with that? Now, the reason we don't have that is because of information. Now, it would be great if we could get detailed information about all the EPCs in our area, and if the DWP would share some information. They're not one for sharing, I must admit, the DWP. And for good reason. They've got their own kind of GDPR rules that they have to abide by. But if we could get that information, we could actually identify different properties in areas. So we could focus on areas that have actually got a high concentration of people who get the qualifying benefits for ECO, and then maybe design a scheme around that. So that sometimes it's the information that we don't have that prevents us actually going to people who need it the most, because occasionally the people who need it the most are less likely to engage with contractors, but they could actually engage with councils. And you'll be happy to know that I'm nearly finished. But the fourth point I've got is that properties that have got an EPC or EF or G usually have other issues. Now, we have had occasions where we put lovely external wall insulation onto a property and it's got a hole in the roof, but the owners don't get any funding for condition repairs. They only get it for energy. And I think this is going to be a key going forward, because our housing stock isn't in the best condition, especially if it's owned or private rented. So that's going to be an issue for us. And there was one case, thankfully we stopped it, but there was one case where there were structural works required for a non-traditional property. So the structural works cost £17,000, but the energy efficiency measures were free. So one of my colleagues was going to draft up a letter saying, pay us £17,000 and get this for free. And that's not really the best thing to say to somebody. And also we've got other blocks that need repairs done before any energy efficiency works can be applied. So these are kind of concerns for us. But lastly, we have a concern about the scheme delivery, because when you read the ECO guidance, it puts a lot of emphasis on the local authority, which is nice. And it says, actually, I think it's we are responsible for the eligibility. And when we read that, we thought responsibility sometimes means liability. And so are we going to be held account to what we actually put through for people? So you've got different criteria. So you've got 3 pay slips, for instance, for the affordability, but it's 3 pay slips surely enough to prove what somebody earns over a year. And then you've got the GP. We had discussions with Ofgem, and somebody suggested that we have to double check if it's a real GP, because it could just be somebody random. And you're like, we're a wee bit unhappy with that. And again, there's GDPR issues. So we're gathering evidence on people, whether it be financial information, medical information, and you're talking about free school meals. So potentially we're holding information about vulnerable children. That has to be kept in a very secure place, something we've not done before. So we had to get our legal services included in that. And again, it's early days, but we've put through 40 addresses already to Ofgem for ECO 4. And there's been a delay in getting it. There's obviously been teething issues and things, but we're just wondering, we've had our scheme up and running for a wee while and nothing's going through. And it's not necessarily because the contractors or residents are causing delays. We've sent it to Ofgem. There's nothing coming back.
Well, we're really getting into issues now. Thank you, Douglas. So, and I don't want to be cutting you off, but as you can see, we've got hundreds of people on the session. We're getting quite a few questions now as well, actually. So
no, not a problem. I just wanted to go into more detail about some of the issues that we're having and how some people might miss out. But on you go, please.
No,
continue.
It's excellent. Yeah, I mean, you've covered eligibility concerns for contractors. Are we hitting the right people? Funding bans, communities getting left behind, lack of information, other issues and costs, and ultimately that whole delivery thing with responsibility and liability. So we're really getting into the issues now. So I think I'm going to come next, I think, to Sofia, but maybe I could ask the panel. We're getting quite a lot of questions. I wonder if you could, when you're not speaking, maybe if there's obviously a question you can give a quick response to, if you'd like to hit the comment thing and type a response while one of your fellow panelists is speaking, that would be great in helping us cover some of those questions, because it's lovely to see them all, but we're unlikely to be able to do them all before the close of the hour. So yeah, if you could multitask a little bit, please, listen and type, that would be fantastic. Right, Sofia, coming to you then in these challenges. So as Douglas has been saying, amongst those who actually qualify for help under the scheme, still seems to be a lack of awareness about availability, how to apply. So my throwing down the gauntlet to you is, surely energy companies themselves could be doing more to boost take-up of energy efficiency measures. So what's holding you back? Is there a lack of dialogue and partnership with housing association and local authorities? Or is it that central government's just not driving the agenda? Why is it difficult, Sofia?
I think, energy companies could always be doing more. Events and, forums like this really help that, create that awareness for you to understand what we offer as each utility is very, very different. We all have different ways of, completing our obligations. For us to also in these forums understand what your needs are, and also, for us to put a face to the name as well. So I think this sort of platform really helps with that. You asked the question, like, is government not driving the agenda? I think from our perspective, they put the framework and budgets in place. Ultimately, it's us that we deliver those. So whether it's ECO, Green Home Grants, LAD, HUG, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, ECO Plus, there's lots and lots of funding streams available. At E.ON, we're constantly feeding into the modelling and design of these schemes, and we do feel that the government is listening. If you look at the funding from ECO 3 to ECO 4, it's almost doubled. And then also E.ON and a couple of other suppliers, we were sort of very instrumental in lobbying for the introduction of ECO Plus. It's our input, knowing the market, knowing that ECO 4 is missing properties and vulnerable households, that still need help, that has paved the way for this additional stream of funding. To help sort of create awareness, we at E.ON have 3 routes to market. We have our self-gen route, which is working with contractors and installers, and effectively we'll give them a 3-month or a 6-month funding agreement. They'll go out, they'll get eligible ECO 4 measures across to us, and we'll give them the funding. We then have our lead fed channel, which is where we run marketing campaigns to generate leads. So this could be working with Citizens Advice Bureau, Age Concern, or other charities. And then we also have the E.ON-led community approach, which is what I spoke about earlier, working with local authorities and housing associations on these area-based schemes to really drive the opportunities. I've been in ECO for just under 10 years. And for me, I think the biggest challenge still facing us today with local authorities and housing associations is resource and being able to contract. I think from the work that I've done, some local authorities are more proactive than others. I think there is an issue of resource in-house to administer these schemes. I think, Doug, you mentioned, liabilities and the requirements that are needed. And I think that's where we come in. So through our E.ON-led approach, we would take that pressure away from you by managing those schemes, with support from yourselves, but we take a lot of that burden away. We ask that local authorities, get your statement of intent published if you haven't already. Get into dialogue with the supplier. Hopefully it's us, but it doesn't need to be. There's plenty for us all. And then have a chat to public health and see if you can get something set up to get working on Route 3. And then also, I think, local authorities and housing associations, if you can have conversations early on with your legal and procurement teams to see that, can you work with us? Can you have these direct awards? Because sometimes that can be a stumbling block for us. We can work with you to ensure that we have data sharing agreements, so DSAs in place. That'll help ensure that you can share declarations with third parties, such as suppliers like ourselves or installers. And just so you're aware, I know I've heard recently there's been a bit of a confusion around, Ofgem providing these DSAs between third parties. And, Ofgem have said that they definitely won't be doing that. They're unable to do it. And in return for doing all of this, I think what we'll do for you is manage those ECO4 Flex projects for you. We'll explain how EcoFlex works from our perspective, what we need to complete our obligation, and including these data sharing agreements. We'll ring fence funding for you, and then you as a local authority and housing association can accurately declare what your carbon emissions are for the particular year that we're working in. And I think it's fair to say that the Eco4 guidance in general and local authorities, it hasn't been worded well. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you just
It's,
have.
yeah, so, BEIS haven't communicated with local authorities properly either, and I think that's caused a lot of confusion. So, we do see a slower uptake and delivery of EcoFlex, which, based on what we've seen, was inevitable. So that's where we come in, to help, support you to overcome those hurdles and challenges.
Good stuff. Great. Thanks, Sophia. So some good news. Government is listening, you're saying, and energy companies were able or have been able to influence policy positively to help those in need. Good name check for charities, the likes of Age Concern, another party who can assist in particular communities and with particular individuals. Pointed out the resource issue affecting local authorities. Obviously, budgets are never going to get bigger in that respect in terms of personnel. And you suggest team working with energy companies can obviously help plug some of those gaps. And a good mention for communication as well, because a lot of this comes down to lack of information or the available information not being well enough communicated. So the last of these challenges then, Chris, and I really appreciate you made a start on answering some of those questions. So Sofia, I think I'm going to put you on duty now to see if you can type the odd question answer there in the bottom while I'm asking Chris some. So you'll see the others have already been doing some work because we've got a whole host of questions. So Chris, coming to you then, challenges. As we said, long-awaited Eco Plus scheme. They finally revealed it late last year, $1 billion extra 3-year extension, as you said. However, the delay in announcing it even didn't help anyone. It flew in the face of the urgent need to address energy consumption affordability concerns. So what's the problem? Is there a lack of policy ambition, a lack of political will, or is it just simply governments short of cash and delaying spending? What's the issue there, Chris?
Well, I think the issue with it really overall has been that it's struggled to get out the gate and fallen. It's been very keen to get out the gate as a scheme, and it's fallen over in the attempt to. In fact, and I think there's probably 5 main areas, and they all interrelate. But the first one, lest we forget, is the government kept falling apart. I can say that without without a trace of melodrama, because it's factually accurate. But it was Boris Johnson's administration that was first investigating Eco Plus. Then it went to Liz Truss's administration and was fully it was explained more in Kwasi Kwarteng's growth plan, which is, of course, the main thing we remember from that growth plan, which in fact then led, some of the fallout from said growth plan then led to the Liz Truss administration then falling away as well. And then we now have the Rishi Sunak administration, who's finally released the consultation. So in terms of behind the scenes action and getting the scheme off the ground, that has not been helped by the fact that we've had multiple different governments and ministers in charge. So it's been bounced around from person to person. The second thing is that given this, I think the government's engaged very well with, I don't know if Sophia wants to correct me there, but I think the government engaged quite well with the suppliers. I think the installers, however, were brought in too late. So a lot of the installers having to do the work felt very, not shoved aside, but like it was being sort of thrown at them quite a late stage in the game. And I think the third problem as part of that is that the consultation process was much too short. I think the government felt that this was all obvious stuff and it would all go without a hitch. But 3.5 weeks for a consultation is not enough. The minimum requirement is supposed to be 6, which is what we got for Eco4, and the maximum is supposed to be more in the region of 12 weeks. So 3.5 right before Christmas is not a good way to engage with the industry. Related problem number 4 is that it doesn't pay to forget about legislation. Installers were asked about early delivery, and early delivery is clearly something you want to encourage because of this winter being the way it is. The more of these things we get to people's home, the better. However, if you're an installer and you're being asked by the government to go and install measures into people's homes before the legislation's arrived, with the consultation saying it would maybe be in place by April, and you're taking on all that risk, it's not very appealing to people. So that is not, it doesn't pay to forget the legislation and to sort of ask people to go and do early delivery without thinking about having more guarantees of when that legislation is going to be there.
Yep.
And then the fifth and probably a broader question is, in some ways, what's the scheme for? Because we were mentioning, I think Douglas earlier was mentioning blended funding and sort of how ECO4 is not terribly happy with it. But ECO Plus, as far as I understand it originally, was meant to sort of really, as the name implies, boost ECO4. But with the way that the scheme is currently sort of being set out, it's being set out for the fuel poor, it's being set out for sort of the more able to pay. And in terms of what the scheme is trying to do, the potential for the scheme is so broad. Half the problem with this consultation and with the industry feedback was that people wanted different things. I mean, I'm a trade association rep. I have to reply to consultations on behalf of all of my members. And some of my members were saying it's ridiculous. It should be going towards people who are sort of higher earners. It should be only focused at people those in fuel poverty and the people who are going to struggle the most. And then I had other members saying, well, that's ridiculous because ECO4 exists. That's what that's for. If you're just focusing it on those people, how is it different to ECO4? And all this tussle between all these different things ECO Plus could be, while it's been great to have that debate and get it going, it hasn't helped get it off the ground immediately. So I think in terms of that, policy ambition and political will, I would say are actually probably there. I think the government being short on cash, yes, it is. It's always short on cash for these kinds of schemes. But I think probably the main thing has been sort of the lack of focus and sort of being ambitious, but not being sort of coherent enough out the gate to really sort of have a speedy delivery. For this kind of scheme, you have to have a dead clear idea about what you want and what can be delivered. And I feel like we haven't really had that just yet. So more to do.
Excellent. Really good analysis there. So as you point out, obviously the changing of the guard in Westminster, hugely disruptive for any scheme in any sector. Good point is stallers consulted too late. Everybody consulted too little. 3.5 weeks is a nonsense really in terms of consultation. But a nice point at the end then about what the scheme's actually for in terms of clarity around the purpose and the objectives. And obviously that might help the drafting and the process. So I think we might jump and take a couple of questions because it's really busy. I've got a little round of questions to finish with, but let's dive in and I'm going to try and fire them out quickly. You've been doing some sterling work answering some already, so I'd encourage the audience to read not only the questions in the Ask a Question box, but some of the answers because the panel have been doing good work, as I say, but I'm going to try and pick up one or two of the others that we can maybe fire off fast responses to. So, for example, if I could, Sofia, if I might come to you first, just to pick a couple of these from Max and Stuart McGowan. Solid walls, insulation, double glazing, and I think there was one about infrared. I wonder if you could mention if any of those issues are currently covered, or those measures, I should say, within some of the ecos. So solid wall insulation and double glazing, we can maybe tick off a couple of those questions quickly. Sofia, your thoughts, please.
So most of those measures are included. I think what we find with double glazing is, does it give you enough notional annual bill savings? So normally when you look at a project, you look at, you've done the full retrofit assessment, you've seen the current EPC is this, you need to get it to this EPC, for example, it'll give you a whole host of measures. What we found is, at the moment, from my understanding, we've not had any glazing come through, but obviously solid wall is where the most funding is. So there's definitely those measures there. I will refer people to the eco measures table that's been updated as well. And that gives you, per tenure. And then it basically breaks down all the measures that are eligible. But yeah, those definitely are included within those.
Excellent, thanks. So maybe Douglas, I wonder if you could add a little about challenges of insulating solid walls and double glazing. I wonder if you could give us a little comment as well on those two.
Well, eventually we've had a few issues with the EWI, things like stairs, downpipes, gas boxes, just your kind of details of houses that we've got. Although, to be fair, we're now insulating more cavity-filled properties rather than solid wall. But it is the detail, and especially if you put a building warrant in and you say this is going to meet 0.17, and you've maybe got stairs which prohibit a wall getting done, or perhaps you've got an owner and the way it's directed, you can't use their airspace to put EWI on. We do have some issues with that. Basically, you will have to either put more insulation on other areas, or you'll just have to reduce or increase the U value that you're applying to that property. So yes, there are issues, but my impression is if you have reasons, record your reasons why you can't meet certain targets, U values or standards, and if you get audited, you can say, look, bang, 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 this is why we can't meet it. That's the main kind of message.
Excellent. Show you're working. And I think, actually, speaking of, you must be the hardest working panel ever. You're doing some great stuff in terms of picking up the questions, but it's good. It shows what an important issue and debate this is that we're having. So, Chris, if I could come a couple to you, sort of at the bottom of the list of questions at present. You've just answered the one from Amanda Palmer a little bit about, is it measures only or is fund available for administration and management? I wonder maybe if you could repeat your answer there, but also pick up the one below. Is EcoFlex prioritized towards fabric approach or fabric first approach? So I wonder if you could just say a little extra about the administration and management option and also fabric first, please, Chris.
Sure. So yes, as I popped in the chat, the administration and management is factored into the funding for Eco Plus and also for Eco 4. I think as well, it's worth bearing in mind the cost of these are very high, and in fact, it's a large portion of the scheme. The impact assessment, and coming back to my comments about sort of the consultation period being too short, the impact assessment only came out a week and a half through that 3.5 weeks for Eco Plus. But that includes about 300 million for the actual measures themselves, and then everything else is additional costs. So I think quality assurance and administration are about 200 million each on their own from memory. So yes, there's quite a lot of other areas that do get funded through that. And EcoFlex being prioritized towards fabric approach first, well, there's a fabric first approach within Eco 4 generally. So one of the things that my members have been saying, so yes, that will include EcoFlex. One of the things that my members have been keen to emphasize to me is that because of the fabric first approach, which is good, we do support it, because if you have people in fuel poverty, just upgrading the fabric of the building itself is one of the key ways you can get them out of that, sort of before you even look at the heating side of it. But one of the issues with that is that a lot of funding, the way the scoring system works for Eco 4, a lot of funding goes towards the insulation measures, and then there's not enough for the additional measures you'd need for the heating as well. So yes, fabric first is very good, but the whole point of Eco 4 in comparison to Eco 3 is to look at the whole house approach. You need to keep that in mind. And as has been said earlier, the heating systems are often the bugbear of these schemes for some of these lower EPC bands. So yes.
Excellent, thank you. Right, so and still if you would keep firing away there on the comments to the questions, and I'm going to now ask just the last round because we're getting into the last 5 or 10 minutes. Very good work in the chat as well, some nice links shared. So my last round of questions is, we've looked at the issues, we've looked at the problems, difficulties. We've in some cases had a bit of a moan and a whinge, but I'd like to finish reasons to be cheerful. So I'm going to ask you to be brisk. We've got about 5 minutes for positive. So I'm going to look at how successful sustainable approaches can fund saving energy and money, can help housing associations and local authorities look after residents and their stock, and help government towards its net zero ambitions. So, Sofia, coming to you first, a quick rose-tinted spectacles on here. This is the cheery part of things. So what's the best you can expect to achieve with eco funding now and in the future? Sell us this utopian vision. What's the best that can happen, Sofia?
So I think if we looking at Eco 3 with £640 million, we helped over 150,000 customers, around 230,000 measures were installed, and £1.9 billion was saved in lifetime bill savings. So that's just with the 640 million. Now, if we look at that as a percentage, just under 10% of that was delivered in Scotland. So I think for us, we'd like to achieve a lot more in Eco 4 in Scotland, especially with the rural uplift. There's lots of positives there. As I mentioned earlier, Eco 4's got this £1 billion per annum budget. So, with the funding that we've got, there's an even bigger opportunity to do a lot more in Eco 4 by really upgrading properties to ensure that they retain heat, we reduce the running costs of a home, we lower those carbon emissions, and ultimately help vulnerable households and people with any associated health conditions. So in terms of Eco 4, what we've funded and delivered so far from July to December, we've seen lots of challenges. We've seen it really start to ramp up. So if we look at our delivery, sort of the last quarter of 2022, we've just seen it just moving in the right direction. So we know the work's there. We're sort of overcoming those challenges. People are finding ways of working together. And I think from what we've delivered so far, last year, 6% of that has been in Scotland. So, again, we'd like to do a little bit more there. And in terms of high level numbers for ECO4, to date, we've notified circa sort of 50 flex projects with around 130 measures being notified. So they are slowly starting to trickle through. And I think the more sort of dialogue that we have with each other, the more we communicate, we can share best practice and really get these projects moving. We've got lots and lots of funding. We've got lots of different, streams of funding as well. So I think the possibilities are quite, promising. And I think from what we're doing at the moment, and working with you guys, I think we want to help as many local authorities as possible maximise, funding and to make a bigger impact in your communities as we can.
Good news. Lots of positives there. And as you say, delivery is ramping up, but a call for more dialogue, which is well made. And so in this quick fire, cheerful round, Chris, I'm coming to you hypothetically. Just imagine you have a magic wand. If government were to grant you one wish on eco funding, just one deliverable wish, a realistic wish, what would you ask for on behalf of your members that'd be a real game changer? So you've got that wish. What are you asking for, Chris?
So being slightly cheeky and taking it outside of eco, my big thing would be the government needs to sort out what it's doing with everything else. Eco Plus is kind of straight into the territory of owner-occupiers and more able to pay because there isn't any policy there. And if we had policies there, we'd be more focused in what we were doing with these kinds of schemes. However, that's not really answering a question because that's not really eco funding specifically. I would say that it needs to be extended. I think 2025, 2026 is good, but we have a target that the Climate Change Committee has set out of all houses being EPC Band C where possible by 2035. The government sort of adheres to that target with a lot of exceptions. But extending it out to the 2030s, I think would be fantastic. It would give the industry so much more stability for such a longer time, to train people up and to bring people in. So that would be my ask.
No, good shout there. Call for extension to 2030. So more, please. And finally, in the quick fire round, so a bit of crystal ball gazing for you here, Douglas. Fast forward maybe 5 or 10 years, in just 1 or 2 minutes, picture it for us. What might imagine things have gone brilliantly. What might success look like for energy efficiency funding over 5 or 10 years?
I think it's people. So if you take people from fuel poverty so that they can actually live in their home, they're comfortable and secure, that would be success to me for individuals. I mean, there was one chap I spoke to had exterior wall insulation. His wife had a heart condition and he had to have his heating on all day. Once we put EWI on his house, he says it's great. I only need to put it on in the morning and that's it. And it's great. And he was delighted because obviously he was saving money. He was in a comfortable home and he could have more kind of money to kind of spend on other things. So no, I think it's the people that they actually, that'd be good.
That's a really good point, well made. So the work is being done on the properties, but of course it's being done for the people. So a more people-centric approach going forward. So that's it. We are now 2 minutes. You've done great work, panel, typing your answers. Lots of good questions. So in closing, big thank you to our panelists, Douglas, Chris, and of course Sofia, and our sponsors, the lovely people at E.ON. To yourselves, virtual audience out there on Crowdcast, lots of great questions, lots of good chat, comments as well. Reminder to check out elementaldigital.co.uk, online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. Full diary of events on the website. Another one coming up 4 p.m. this afternoon. Back catalogue, all free to watch on demand, and this will be available to rewatch immediately after we've finished here. So if you missed the start or you just like to catch up on it again, read some more of the comment and questions, you can do that almost the second we've finished. So thanks again to the panel. Super hard work, all of you. That's it for now. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at Susmeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Bye-bye.